In Jujutsu Kaisen, Kenjaku is considered one of the most innovative sorcerers of all time. However, he is also a weirdo, because he not only does some of the most twisted, morally questionable experiments, but in one of these experiments he even became pregnant. Kenjaku is manipulative, sociopathic, and values his intellectual curiosity above all else, to the point where human lives don't matter to him. However, while all these things make Kenjaku seem like he's just a crazy rambling madman, he is actually very calm and calculating. Kenjaku rarely panics, he has a plan for everything, and is very arrogant. And this is because Kenjaku has the skills to back up his crazy antics. Kenjaku managed to seal one of the strongest sorcerers of all time, defeated a special grade cursed spirit in straight combat, and at one point created a culling game putting all of humanity into harm's way just so he could see humanity evolve. Kenjaku was a legitimate powerhouse. But even then, how did Kenjaku even get something of this scale to happen? Well, one of the reasons is one of the most evil sorcerers in history, Noritoshi Kamo. Noritoshi Kamo was once the head of the prestigious Kamo clan. As one of the three biggest Jujutsu families, the Kamo family held considerable influence in the Jujutsu world. However, a significant incident stained the clan's legacy. In the beginning of the Meiji era, a woman was somehow able to become pregnant with a half-human, half-cursed baby. Because of this, she was ostracized from her community and she sought refuge at a temple that Noritoshi ran. However, this refuge ended up becoming her worst mistake. And this was because Noritoshi was actually Kenjaku. Kenjaku's innate technique allowed him to transplant his brain in someone else's body, and alongside physical control, Kenjaku would gain access to the body's original cursed energy, cursed techniques, and even memories. By doing this, Kenjaku was able to live extremely long, and throughout the centuries was able to get stronger and satiate his morbid curiosity to his heart's desire. And this was no different when Kenjaku took over Noritoshi's body. When Kenjaku took in the pregnant woman, he tortured, abused, and experimented on her, resulting in her having 9 pregnancies and 9 abortions. Because of these experiments, Kenjaku made Noritoshi gain the title of the most evil sorcerer in history, and people associated the horrors of Kenjaku's experiments with the Kamo clan. However, Kenjaku not only left behind this horrible legacy, but also the results of his experiments, which were called the Death Womb Paintings. The Death Womb Paintings were cursed objects that appeared as small human fetuses. While the objects weren't able to act independently, if they were ingested by a human, they were able to fully incarnate into a being capable of using Jujutsu. These fully incarnated beings were pretty powerful, with numbers 1 to 3 of the death paintings classified as special grade cursed objects. However, even though Kenjaku had created the death paintings, he had no attachment to them and in his sociopathic self considered them no more than objects. However, the Death Womb paintings did not share this lack of attachment and held an extreme familial bond to each other, and this was especially seen when 3 of the Death Womb paintings were incarnated. At some point in history, Jujutsu High had found the Death Womb paintings and sealed them away. However, during an incident where curses invaded Jujutsu High, a curse named Maito was able to find the paintings and incarnate 3 of them. And the names of the 3 were Choso, Eso, and Kechisu. Out of all the Death Womb paintings, these 3 were the only ones that were classified as special grade, and this was for good reason. In the process of creating the Death Womb paintings, Kenjaku had infused them with Noritoshi's blood, which gave them the same blood manipulation powers attributed to the Kamo clan. While the extent of how much they could manipulate blood differed between the 3 of them, all 3 were still formidable opponents. And even though they were cursed objects, they shared a strong familial bond. All 3 brothers cherished each other immensely, and their bond was to the point that when they were first incarnated, the eldest brother Choso said that, quote, the 3 of them only live for one another. However, even though they shared such strength and bonds, the brothers weren't meant to stay together for long. When the brothers were first incarnated, they decided to side with a group of cursed spirits that had incarnated them. Because of this, Eso and Kechisu were sent to retrieve one of Sukuna's fingers. However, this mission ended up in a terrible outcome. During the missions, the brothers ended up running into 2 Jujutsu sorcerers named Yuji and Nobara, and they ended up in a fight. Initially, it looked like the brothers would easily deal with them, but they ran into the worst possible matchup in Nobara. Both Eso and Kechisu were able to use their blood to decay anyone they came into contact with, and while this technique was usually very effective, Nobara's resonance technique countered it. By using resonance, Nobara made it so that the brothers would both be hurt by their own technique. Because of this and other circumstances, Nobara and Yuji gave Eso and Kechisu the beating of their lifetime and even ended their lives. However, in the aftermath of this, the eldest brother Choso, who was somewhere else at the time, was able to sense both of his brothers' demise. Because of this, Choso swore revenge on his brother's killers. However, he would soon be in for a surprise. During the Shibuya incident, Choso and his group were able to successfully seal the world's strongest sorcerer, Gojo Satoru, away. In the aftermath of the situation, many sorcerers attempted to rescue Gojo, and this included Yuji. However, unfortunately for Yuji, he was a popular commodity. Because of Yuji's past fights and status as Sukuna's vessel, multiple parties wanted to deal with Yuji, and this included Choso. However, because there were so many conflicting options on how to deal with Yuji, the multiple parties eventually came to an agreement that whoever found Yuji first could do whatever they wanted to him. And after a bit of time, Choso ended up running into Yuji first, and the two immediately got into a fight. Choso, like his brothers, had the power to manipulate blood, but out of all his brothers, Choso was undoubtedly the strongest. Choso could shoot his blood like a high-speed piercing arrow, manipulate his blood to increase his strength and speed, and would never run out of blood as long as he had cursed energy. Because of Choso's abilities and strength, Choso and Yuji had a brutal fight where Choso was eventually able to defeat Yuji, knocking him unconscious. However, as Choso went to land the final blow, he was stopped by an intense vision that showed him and his brother sharing a meal with Yuji, and Yuji even calling Choso brother. This vision was so intense that it put Choso in shock, and he decided just to leave Yuji alive. And this vision had a lasting impact on Choso. Because of this memory, Choso decided that Yuji was actually one of his brothers and switched from hunting him down to becoming his ally, even saving Yuji's life in later fights. And while it seemed like Choso might just be having delusions, his vision was actually correct because in a sense, he and Yuji shared the same parent, and that parent was Kenjaku. Because Kenjaku's main purpose in life was to satiate his intellectual curiosity, he was constantly experimenting or finding new things to work on. However, as he lived throughout the years, he found his ultimate goal, which was to evolve humanity by combining it with an entity named Tengen. However, to do something of this magnitude, Kenjaku needed an incredible amount of cursed energy, which he decided to generate by staging a culling game. This culling game would generate cursed energy by pitting sorcerers against each other, and he was able to start this process by preserving strong curses and sorcerers from the past to later reincarnate them in the future. And one of these people was the strongest of all time, Sukuna. In the past, Kenjaku was able to convince Sukuna to split his soul into 20 different fingers so that Sukuna could be later reincarnated. However, Kenjaku needed someone that could be a suitable vessel for Sukuna. To prepare for this, Kenjaku found a man named Jin that was somehow the reincarnation of Sukuna's twin. Originally, Sukuna was supposed to be born with a twin brother, but because he could break any rule, before birth he somehow got rid of his twin. Because of this, for centuries, his twin soul wandered aimlessly until it reincarnated as Jin. When Kenjaku found Jin, he was married to a woman named Kaori, so Kenjaku decided to take over her body and become pregnant with Jin's child. And when the child was born, Kenjaku even infused him with Sukuna's finger. And this child was actually Yuji Itadori. Because of all this, Yuji was blessed with not only superhuman physical ability, but was the only person that could house Sukuna's soul and not lose control. However, while Kenjaku had successfully created a vessel for Sukuna and created a way to generate cursed energy, he also needed to obtain Tengen. And while there were many obstacles in the way of Kenjaku, he found a way to get past all of them. Kenjaku's personality was one that was extremely meticulous as he looked at every aspect of something before he planned it out. Because of how he approached things, Kenjaku was probably the only person that could create a plan to evolve humanity and see it through. From sealing away the only sorcerer that could stop the culling game to reincarnating the strongest sorcerer of all time, Kenjaku figured out how to get past every obstacle, and this was no different with Tengen. In Kenjaku's plan, Tengen was pivotal as both Tengen's immortality and massive amount of cursed energy made her the perfect thing to combine humanity with. However, other people knew Kenjaku was coming for Tengen and set out to protect her. When Kenjaku showed up to take Tengen away, he was faced with both Choso and special grade sorcerer Yuki Tsukumo. Yuki was one of the few people in the world that had a chance in defeating Kenjaku, and this was for good reason. Yuki was one of 4 officially classified special grade sorcerers in the world, was very battle tested, and had an incredibly strong technique. Yuki's curse technique allowed her to grant virtual mass to either herself or her Shikigami, giving her attacks extreme destruction, and on top of this, she was extremely proficient at reverse curse healing. Together with Choso, Yuki went back and forth with Kenjaku, however, eventually, Kenjaku was able to gain the upper hand and land a fatal blow on Yuki. Because of this, Yuki in a last-ditch effort used her technique to add so much mass that she created a literal black hole. Now this attack would normally beat anyone, however because Kenjaku used an anti-gravity technique and Tengen had used a barrier to contain the black hole, Kenjaku survived and won the fight. In the aftermath, Kenjaku absorbed Tengen and went on his way, and at this point, Kenjaku looked incredibly formidable. However, Kenjaku eventually faces defeat, and surprisingly, it was to a comedian. When Kenjaku created the culling games, he made it so that random non-sorcerers would gain powers and participate in the games. And one of these people was Fumihiki Takaba. Before the culling games, Takaba had been a failing comedian that still had utmost confidence in his humor. To Takaba, only he found his jokes funny, but this didn't deter him from being extremely goofy, and he lived to entertain above all else. However, even though Takaba was such a goofy, borderline delusional guy, when the culling games started, he was given incredibly strong powers. Takaba's power was that if he thought of something that he was certain was funny, it would become reality. The power was so strong that it could even force others into Takaba's comedic scenarios and force their participation. However, even though Takaba's powers were literally reality bending, he was utterly clueless about his powers, and at first glance he seemed like a useless idiot. However, this idiot ended up having a hand in Kenjaku's defeat. When Kenjaku and Takaba first met, Kenjaku tried to end the fight quickly, but no matter what Kenjaku threw at Takaba, he couldn't even harm him. Kenjaku quickly realized that Takaba's power was an embodiment of his imagination, and Kenjaku determined that he had to approach the fight carefully, otherwise he would risk getting completely defeated. And as the fight went on, Kenjaku figured out that Takaba's power actually was tied to Takaba's confidence and how fun he was. When Kenjaku figured this out, he started to mind game Takaba, stabbing at his confidence, weakening his power. However, this ended up backfiring on Kenjaku as Takaba was able to find his true motivation of being a comedian and made it his goal to make Kenjaku laugh. With this renewed confidence, Takaba's power forced Kenjaku into a fever dream of bad comedy skits, doing both physical and comedic damage to Kenjaku. However, Kenjaku soon realized that the only way to end these scenarios was to satiate Takaba's love of comedy, and Kenjaku was able to do just that by aiding in a scenario where he and Takaba were a comedic duo and Takaba was able to fully reach his dreams. Because of this, Takaba was able to achieve what he always wanted and said that, quote, he didn't want this to end. After this situation, both of them were brought back to reality, with Kenjaku even complimenting Takaba's comedy. However, while Kenjaku was being distracted by Takaba, a sorcerer named Yuta appeared and sliced off Kenjaku's head. While normally Kenjaku would have been able to sense Yuta approaching, because Takaba had been enjoying the situation so much, he didn't want anyone interrupting the show. And this allowed Yuta to come in for the sneak attack. At this point, Kenjaku was completely defeated, but he still managed to transfer the authority to activate the Tengen merger to Sukuna. And funnily enough, as Yuta went to finish off Kenjaku, Kenjaku was more concerned about the fact that he wasn't able to have the fun he desired, rather than the fact he was dying. To the end, Kenjaku was just kind of a weirdo.
何をしとるブラジル体操